I think we're starting now. Is that correct? We in?
Yeah, you're live.
Okay, welcome everyone to Out in the Field, discussing the full LGBTQ participation in sports. I'm reading from dummy cards here, so I apologize. My name is Steve Buckley. I'm a senior writer with The Athletic. I'm based in Boston. I will be your moderator this evening. The folks, if you want captioning, there's a function at the bottom of the screen. You can turn those on. You can also submit any questions you may have during the question and answer feature. Tonight, we will be discussing the history and ongoing issues facing the LGBTQ community's participation in sports, talking about Joanna Lohman and Paul Tukey's book, which I have somewhere right here because product placement is very important. I'm going to hold this book up. There you go. And we're going to be talking about that, raising tomorrow's champions. And hopefully by the end of this evening, we will convince you, if you haven't already, to support and join NCLR's work to ensure success for sports for all. Okay, the bios. These are the people that are with us tonight. Amy Whelan has been a senior, and this is quite a resume because I was reading it earlier, and this is, I don't know how she does all this in one day. Amy Whelan has been senior staff attorney at the National Center for Lesbian Rights since 2011. She works on NCLR's full range of litigation, policy, and public education work. She litigates complex civil cases around the country regarding marriage equality, employment discrimination, Title IX, family law, access to healthcare, prisoners' civil rights, the First Amendment, and other constitutional matters. She grew up playing team sports in Massachusetts, which is where I'm from, eventually attending Princeton University, where she played softball all 4 years. Angela Hucles Mangano is a two-time Olympic gold medalist for U.S. soccer, two-time World Cup bronze medalist, former professional soccer player of the Boston Breakers, and the U.S. Soccer Foundation's 2009 Humanitarian of the Year. Angela was recently named a Vice President of Player Development for Operations for Angel City Football Club of the NWSL. Joanna Lohman, author of Raising Tomorrow's Champions, is a former professional soccer player and a member of the United States women's national team during her 16-year professional career. And I cannot imagine playing one sport for 16 straight years and staying in one piece. She has built a platform for social impact and become the first player in Washington Spirit history to have her jersey retired. Joanna, let's start with you. You are the author of the book. I read what I thought were the pertinent chapters the other day for the purposes of this discussion. It's striking to me that a book with this title, Raising Tomorrow's Champions, starts off with 3 highly provocative chapters focusing on gender orientation and race. Why are these the first 3 chapters in the book that you present as being about life lessons in parenting? And did you ever worry that these chapters might scare away prospective readers?
Yeah, I mean, we worried about it. And it was a debate between my co-author and I of what we should put in the beginning of the book. We really wanted to start it in a strong way. And, you know, having interviewed over 100 of the greatest women's soccer players of all time, especially from the U.S. women's national team, who I think is the most socially significant team in the world, who is constantly advocating for social justice, it just made sense in our brains that we would start the first 3 chapters with gender orientation and race. And I think parents really need natural touch points to discuss these topics with their children. And through Raising Tomorrow's Champions, you get to read personal stories of players who have gone through these issues. One of which is on the panel with us is Angela Hucles. And you really get to relate, and the players are humanized through these stories, and parents naturally get to bring up these topics, which can be difficult topics to bring up and discuss with your children in very organic ways through the book. And I think, you know, today in this day and age, any athlete that is working to make the national team or anyone who's pursuing their passion are going to face these types of issues, and they're going to have to figure out ways to have difficult conversations. So it was a tough decision for us, but at the end of the day, we felt like we wanted to start the book with these social justice aspects and to start off on a strong foot.
So follow-up question. So when I was a kid growing up, this kind of information would not have been available, nor would I have been able to pose the questions because I
Yeah.
wouldn't have known where to go, who to ask. And I think if I did ask the questions, there'd be tremendous concern because I grew up in a different time. My question then is, when a movie comes out, if they have a preview, they will preview the movie and show it to prospective audiences and make necessary changes. I was wondering if before this book came out, in terms of the arrangement of the chapters and what you said, did you talk with people about that first? Did you talk with kids? Did you talk with parents? How did that play out?
So Paul Tukey, my co-author, is a parent of an 11-year-old soccer player, and she wants to make the national team. So naturally, Paul wanted to help his daughter on her journey. And the women's national team is so diverse. It's so incredibly inclusive. And that is one of the reasons for their success. And, the most recent World Cup victory in 2019, their differences were celebrated. And that is why they were so dominant on their way to winning the World Cup in 2019. And we felt like it was a significant part of success is being your authentic selves. And that's why the word authentic is on the cover of the book. It's just so utterly important for all kids to understand that when you're pursuing your passion, to do it authentically is going to lead to success. So we felt like this was a message, this was a life lesson that we wanted to teach kids. And we really wanted parents to understand that you will be your best self when you are your most authentic self. And that means confronting things like gender, orientation, and race, because especially in women's sports, that is going to come up a lot. And it's going to be something that is just a part of life within that journey.
All right, Angela, let's toss it to you. Congratulations. Great career, 100 appearances on the national team. Now, I came out publicly as a sports columnist. I was working for the Boston Herald at the time. I came out 10 years ago when I was well along in my career. I believe that you did the same thing. There was a line in the book from, I think it was your mother that struck, you talk about the threat of oppression. You're Black, you're a woman, you're gay. I'm guessing you agree with Joanna's decision to lead with these 3 chapters. Could you discuss that along with your own experience in developing the courage to come out fully?
I think first and foremost, those first 3 chapters are there because Jo is living her authentic self through this book. Like, she's bold, she is, going to push the limits and push the boundaries. And I think that truly speaks to who she is as a person. So, obviously she's not just talking the talk, but she's walking the walk. So, those are big topics to tackle and to put them at the beginning of the book. And yes, we talked about owning this triple threat of my being Black, actually Cuban as well, a female and gay. And, I think for so long, there was so much hate and oppression that wasn't able to be discussed and talked about. Steve just said it was a lot different, for your time, what you would see and experience than maybe for some of us. And so, changing the dialogue and owning the power and the beauty into identification and, how we truly do feel and are authentically. And so I think for me, being able to have those discussions with my mother to, grow myself from the time I came out. And for me, I don't think it was really like this official coming out. In college, I definitely started letting people know and talking about it and kind of found safety in certain groups. And then it was just more of an evolutionary process, I would say. And I feel like I'm still kind of growing even with this. And, we're in different environments. We feel like we have to come out again, perhaps, meeting new people, even just in the language and the words that we speak, introducing, our partners, perhaps. And so it's definitely been an evolution. And, for me, I had a recent realization, Joe's talking about authenticity and the freeness, with releasing certain things. And I will always remember the story about Megan Rapinoe's kind of decision to come out. And she was talking to her friend and, one of our teammates, Lori Lindsay, and Lori's like, just come out already, and I just remember.
It's been done, but yes.
Yeah, but the discussion was from, Megan's internal struggles, but with her being visible and watching and kind of hearing some of her story about that, I realized it pushed me to be more comfortable with myself, and to also see the importance of actually coming out and what that can do for other people. So even though I was already technically out, even seeing someone else and having that visibility, it matters so much. And so I'm grateful for her for sharing that story of hers too.
Um, I don't know if you put them all in one pot, but I don't know if you call them obstacles, but gender, race, sexual orientation, which was the more difficult to figure out and put it all together, if that makes any sense? Or
Yeah.
is it all one big thing?
I think they're somewhat intertwined because ultimately we're talking about the same thing, just, how we love one another and accept each other, despite our differences, whether that's race or gender or sexuality or whatever. So for me, I think there were a couple things that were a little bit more visible to people, how I looked and how I presented. And so for me, I think I almost had a little bit of a way to hide with my orientation. And so I think because it didn't necessarily force me to address, that earlier on, it was something that I definitely hid for longer. And I think was definitely more challenging for me to, be able to feel comfortable, I still kind of am having safety checks of, is this a safe space for me? Even though I am very out and I have, an amazing family, a wife and kids, but I think that's something that still sticks with me, and perhaps because I am still growing in that respect.
Amy, you've seen a lot in your time at the NCLR. Can you talk about the changes that you've seen through the years within the context of LGBTQ visibility and access to sports? And what does it do for your organization when Joanna comes out 15 years ago and starts doing all the media interviews?
Yeah, first, let me just say that I'm really excited to be on this panel with you all. This is really exciting and I'm a big fan. So NCLR founded our sports project in 2001. So I don't want to out Joanna and Angela's ages, but I think Joanna maybe was in college at that time. And
I think I was still straight then, Amy, actually.
That's how long ago this was.
Dating a guy. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Angela, I think maybe you're a slightly older, so you might have just graduated. And you two should weigh in on this, but those weren't great years for LGBTQ athletes. We founded our sports program because even though many coaches were gay, for instance, they were in the closet because they feared losing their jobs, or they feared that parents wouldn't send recruits or kids to their programs to play. And so Megan Rapinoe, she's going to come up a lot during this talk, but she has this great quote, and I think it's in your book, about how you can't win a championship without the gays. And that's true for coaches too. There have always been and will always be gay coaches of teams, and that spans recreational to the most elite levels of sport. And so, any movement needs trailblazers. And I think Joanna's and Angela's stories track what has happened in the LGBTQ civil rights movement generally. One reason that we have come so far in a relatively short period of time is that so many LGBTQ people have come out, and each person, like people have said already, has their own story. But that visibility is what has changed things so dramatically in recent decades. It's much harder to stigmatize LGBTQ people and their families when those people are your families or your friends or your neighbors or your coworkers. So when Joanna came out and Angela and the other US national team players did, they made it much easier for younger people to follow their lead. They helped create a safer space for all athletes, and they took on the consequences of that so that the younger people coming up behind them hopefully won't have to do that.
The NCLR isn't just about lesbian rights. you're really advocating for all in the LGBTQ community. Can you expand on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, our sports project focuses on homophobia and transphobia in sports at all levels of competition, and everybody in the sports community, so athletes, coaches, and administrators. And because we provide legal services for free and we do advocacy work, we try to focus our work where we think it's most needed. And right now, I think that has to do with trans kids. Now that conservatives have lost their battle against marriage equality, they have refocused their energy on transgender people and trans kids in particular. So we're seeing an unprecedented number of anti-trans bills that are pending in legislatures around the country, including several bills that are trying to ban trans kids from sports teams. Many of these are failing, but some have passed, including one in Idaho that has already been struck down by one court. So, you know, I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to say like something slightly legalese here, but there was a recent decision by the US Supreme Court last year that confirmed something that civil rights attorneys have argued for years. And that is that discrimination against gay people and trans people is sex discrimination. And that's important because a lot of federal laws prohibit sex discrimination. So that case related to employment discrimination, but Title IX has virtually identical language. And courts have already ruled that discrimination against trans kids in school and in sports is sex discrimination. So, you know, if there are trans kids listening to this or parents of trans kids, I hope that gives them hope. I think these laws will fail, but if you're a trans kid, it's a really scary time. These laws send the message that there's something wrong with these kids when there isn't. And that they don't deserve to play on teams with their peers. And I think those are incredibly dangerous messages for kids who thrive when they're in supportive environments like their homes or schools, but who experience really serious mental health consequences when they aren't given that support.
So we had a couple of big news events this week. I guess the biggest is Carl Nassib of the Las Vegas Raiders came out. Joanna, I'll throw this to you because you describe your own coming out experiences in the book. And, you know, my own was that I had written the column. I had talked with various editors at the paper, and we agreed that it would run on January 6, 2011, but it went online at 12:03 a.m. And I had a bunch of people over and Thai food all over the kitchen. And my friend Adam kept refreshing the screen. Finally, he says, it's up. And I get this like feeling that runs through my body. He says, okay, the cat's out of the bag now. There's no going back. My coming out story is online. And like that, the text messages, it just went nuts. Take us back to your own coming out experience and try to tell us as an athlete what Carl's going through right now.
Yeah, you know, I can really relate with Angela's story about there wasn't one moment necessarily. And as I commented to Amy, I was straight for the first 21 years of my life. And then I had an experience with a woman in college. And I always say I got hit by the gay stick and I just came flying out of the closet. So I felt like at that moment, I knew the life that I wanted to lead, but I didn't have a huge platform there. The league in the United States had folded. So there wasn't a professional league for me to play in. And so organically, I just started telling my friends, telling my family, and I started to live my authentic truth day in and day out. And I celebrated being a out gay professional athlete. So my imagination is that Carl must be feeling, like you were saying, probably a huge sense of relief to get that off of his chest, but also it's terrifying. It's exciting. You're not sure the response that you're going to get from everyone. So, you know, I'm sure he's getting a ton of support. You've seen the support from the NFL, from a lot of the players in the NFL. But I'm sure on top of that, he's probably getting a lot of homophobic comments. He's probably getting a lot of hate. And I think for Carl and for anyone who makes that decision to come out is you focus on the positive, right? You focus on the people that support you. You focus on the incredible impact that you are making by sharing your truth. You know, for me personally, I was inspired to continue to advocate for the queer community because I was getting so much positive feedback from the fans, from my teammates, from supporters. And they were saying how much braver it made them feel to live their truth and how much more comfortable it made them feel to be gay, to see the way that I celebrated it. So I can only imagine all of the queer youth today that are looking to Carl as this incredible role model in a very macho, masculine sport that has now shared that he is gay. And all of a sudden, I think they feel a sense of relief that it's okay, right? It's if he can do it, I can do it. So I just think hopefully for Carl, he feels a huge sense of relief and a sense of excitement and almost like a freedom to completely be yourself and to no longer hide what was probably a huge secret in his life.
I wasn't asked to mention this, but I will anyway, but in my profession as a sports columnist, and I can be a little snippy sometimes, that's part of the job. In 10 years, I have never had an athlete say anything to me along those lines, anything derogatory, homophobic. I've never been thrown out of a locker room. I've never had an owner, a general manager, a team executive, a player or clubhouse attendant say anything. You know, I mean, who knows what people say in the privacy of the locker room when I'm not there, but I've been treated just great. And I think that's something that Carl can hang his hat on as he moves forward, because go ahead.
I think I read that his jersey became the #1 selling jersey. So it's just, that's a statement in itself, right?
Exactly. Angela, you were the head of the Women's Sports Foundation. Billie Jean King founded it in, I think, 1973, 74. You're a mom yourself. What should mothers and fathers teach their sons so that one day Carl's news becomes a non-issue?
I think moms and dads should be teaching their sons the same things they're teaching their daughters. You know, I think it's about just treating each other fairly and, you know, just figuring out ways to educate about just the quality of human beings. I think, you know, I come from the belief that we're all connected in some way. And so just kind of taking it down to that base level and building that type of foundation of respect, of treating with kindness, of understanding how to get through times when you disagree, and understanding that it's okay if you're doing it in the right way and you're having dialogue and you know, looking for those growth opportunities. I think what's incredible is that, you know, well, first and foremost, these are things that we all need to kind of, you know, take in and be aware of, and understand, you know, where these issues are truly rooted and coming from. And I think there's so much layered on to, you know, why we're still fighting for, you know, and so many of our opinions, just basic human rights. And I think when I was growing up, you know, I had a different perspective. I had a different, you know, viewpoint, obviously, than I do now, you know, thank goodness. But I remember feeling this, that with what I heard about my race, what I heard about my sexual orientation, what I heard about, you know, gender, I can now remember taking that on, that some of those things were true. And I think that's what we're all really talking about, right? Especially when we're talking to our youth. And I think that's one of the reasons, you know, why I've done so much work with the Women's Sports Foundation, because, you know, sports was able to give me this outlet and this experience where I could shed some of those limiting beliefs, you know, that other people had, and, you know, be able to feel more confident in myself and understand that, you know, back to that triple threat, that those things are, and those qualities are powerful, and those are good things. And so, you know, I think a lot of us need education, adults just as much as youth. And I think I've seen a lot of our youth coming in and growing up in a world that those beliefs are changing. The more that we have these types of conversations, the more that we reaffirm that, you know, our trans kids matter, and they are just the same, you know, as any other athletes, right? And they should have this opportunity to compete and play in sport. And so, you know, having these conversations, teaching our adults and our parents, I think is definitely equally important. But those are the conversations that, you know, I'd love for our next generation and our young people and our children to have from caring adults.
I'm going to go to the question and answer period in a moment, but Amy, first on the transgender issue, especially as it relates to boys becoming girls and then playing sports, can you lay out some of those issues for us and let us know where you think the right side of history ought to be and will be?
Yeah, and I'm really glad we're talking about the Women's Sports Foundation too, because NCLR has partnered with them, and we've been lucky enough to have Billie Jean King at some of our galas and promoting our work, and she's so amazing and awesome. I think that I think that they're going to fail ultimately, but without, some pain, like I talked about, for trans kids and their families. But I think, there's a couple important things to know. One is that there have been trans inclusive policies for many years. Many state athletic associations have adopted those. And the NCAA and the Olympics, for instance, also have trans affirming policies. And I think that, it's important to understand that there are threats to women's sports, but that is not trans kids or trans athletes. And this is something that the Women's Sports Foundation understands, and they've been really vocal about. We co-published a report with them called On the Team, Equal Opportunity for Transgender Athletes, and they also have a policy about trans athletes on their website. So I hope, that they'll fail, but that we will turn to the real things that threaten women's sports. And that includes, the things that Joanna talks about in the book, like racism and sexism, which was on full display, during recent postseason college sporting events where the men's tournaments were far superior to the women's, and transphobia and homophobia in sport, and problems like, sexual harassment and assaults that we saw with USA Gymnastics and USA Swimming. So, I hope that people will start focusing on those real problems so that women's sports continue to thrive and create opportunities for girls and women throughout the country.
I had the pleasure of being on a panel with Chris Mosier, who founded transathlete.org and also produced a documentary called Changing the Game. I know Amy and Angela both know of him. And I think those are two resources that people can look and watch to really be educated on these issues. They're really important issues. And I think there's a lot of misconception. And also Chris was saying, Amy, that if these trans bills do pass, there'll be body policing. Can you talk a little bit more about what that would be and how dangerous that is for our youth?
Yeah, some of these bills talk about, they're basically trying to freeze somebody's gender at the time of their birth certificate. And so, some kids live in states where they can change their birth certificate, and many others don't. And so some of these bills talk about how there can be medical examinations to determine what a kid's sex is. I mean, this is like crazy. This is crazy stuff. But this policing of women's bodies and of trans bodies is not something that's new. We've seen it before with these kind of gender tests that happen really only with women on the women's side of sports. And so I think it's important to understand that history, and it's often tied up with racism as well. But yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Joanna. And Chris is great and such an amazing athlete himself.
I'm not sure if I'm supposed to just read the questions off the screen or if someone else is doing it, but I do see a question. How do trans women compete fairly in women's sports? I'll just throw that out to the panel. I have no other context other than that.
Yeah, well, I'll just say that when we're talking about sports, there's often a distinction made about recreational, what level of sport are you talking about? Are you talking about kids playing or adults playing recreational leagues? Or are you talking about elite athletes who might be participating in like Division I sports or the Olympics and so, I think it's important to understand those distinctions because especially for recreational sports, like everybody should just be able to play. And that's kind of how, sports create such benefits for people psychologically, emotionally, with their character development. And I'm sure Angela and Joanna have those experiences. I have them myself playing sports as a kid. And then with elite athletes, there are common sense policies about how to do this. Like the US Olympic policy and the NCAA policy says that if you're a trans woman, for instance, and you went through male puberty, that as long as you've been off hormones for a year, on hormones for a year or two, that you should be able to participate in the women's competitions. And that's based on clinical evidence and science. Those women have the same circulating sex hormones as a cisgender woman. And so these policies have existed for years, and they work, and they've been, people have been participating at all level of sport, trans athletes, forever.
I just want to throw this to all of you. I'm a student of history in sports history, political history, presidential history, and also gay and lesbian history. And are things better than fill in the blank? And certainly I think things are much better than they were if you go all the way back to Daughters of Bilitis and the Mattachine Society and Stonewall and all that. But a better question, I think, is more relevant. Are things better than they were 6 or 7 years ago? Because I feel that there's been some pushback because of the political climate. I think there are a few things to be concerned about. I just wanted you to share your thoughts. And I'll throw that out to anybody.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a layered question. But I think the fact that Carl Nassib came out, I think things are moving in the right direction when it comes to acceptance for gay athletes. And, that was kind of like the last frontiers for a male athlete. That's why he made history, that no one really had come out during their career in the top 5 sports. And so I do think the progress has been made. I think on the women's side, progress is being made. I still think internationally speaking, we still have a lot of work to be done in terms of acceptance. I know when I played, a couple of my teammates who played internationally for different countries said if they would have shared that they were gay on their team, they would have been kicked off of their team. So I think we're doing well here, but I think globally speaking, we still have a long way to go.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
Well, I'm curious to think what people think too, because just yesterday, Kumi Yokoyama came out as a transgender man from the Washington Spirit, which I think, Joanna, is one of your old teams.
Yeah.
And so that was a really cool thing that happened too, and that, just happened. And I think the fact that he did that, shows real progress that's happened. And there was something else that happened recently. I don't know if there are any mixed martial arts fans here today, but there's a former transgender mixed martial arts fighter named Fallon Fox. And she was actually a former client of NCLR's. She came out as trans in 2013 after she had been fighting in the MMA since 2008. And she experienced an incredible amount of transphobia after she did that. But just recently, one of the other fighters, Rosie Sexton, issued this very public apology to Fallon. And it basically said, I was wrong, I didn't understand, but now I do, and I'm really sorry. And, it could not have been more eloquent and humbling. And I think that is indicative of what we're going to see a lot more of that as in the coming years.
We have a question. Can you all share when you felt, I like this question, it's because it's from the gut. Can you all share when you fell in love with sports and how being able to participate in sports benefited you?
Yeah, I'll jump in. For me, it was the first time I played soccer. And I like to say it was just being able to run and have that feeling of freedom on the field, and then having orange slices, at halftime, the end of the game. They were just this fun that I like, just pure fun that I experienced with it. So I definitely know that was an instant love of the sport. And, you know, I could go on and on about, you know, we've already talked about the Women's Sports Foundation, about, you know, how sports really benefited. And I know we all have our stories on that, but I mean, just so much, everything. Like, it just, I feel like sports really has given me breath, from, you know, the ability to practice in safe spaces, to learn how to, you know, work with people of variety of backgrounds and personalities, and we're all reaching and trying to achieve the, you know, single same goal. You know, skills that I've just taken into my life, into other areas, so many transferable skills. But you know, the Women's Sports Foundation has definitely done research to back up, you know, the actual benefits, you know, of sports participation, and you know, the statistics are just overwhelming, in terms of, especially for young girls, and their safety, and so many other things. But yeah, sports, you know, I think has been probably the most critical component of my life.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I can jump in next. And, you know, everyone on this panel will appreciate the 1999 Women's World Cup victory in the sold out Rose Bowl with Brandi Chastain ripping off her shirt and flexing her muscles. I was 17 at the time, and I was living in the Washington, DC area. So I was one of the lucky youth who got to go see the women's national team accept an award from the president. And I remember like it was yesterday watching them walk out of the bus, Brianna Scurry, Brandi Chastain, Mia Hamm. And that was a moment where I truly believed that I could become a professional soccer player. So for me and for so many young women, the women's national team is just so important in that sense of providing something to aspire to, providing those role models. And that kind of launched me into college, and it really provided me a ton of motivation to see if I could make it to that level.
I just want to invite myself into this because I was never much of an athlete. I played baseball till I was like 41 in various pickup leagues, and I've run the Boston Marathon a couple of times. But in the company that I'm sharing right now, I can barely walk a straight line. What I can tell you is that as a 6 or 7 year old, and this is the cliche part, going to my first Red Sox game and walking up the ramp and seeing the lush green grass and the green monster and the light towers and the scoreboard and all that. But yet, and I love telling this story, I got to a certain age where I found myself looking up at the press box. And I went up there once and I could see all the writers and banging away in those old-fashioned typewriters in the 1960s. And I had this love of sports as a child. I played them all. I played them all horribly, but yet for some reason I knew that they had a part in my life, and this is why we're sitting here today. I love throwing that in there. So the other question I wanted to ask is it easier or harder if you are gay, straight, lesbian, well, not straight, but is it easier as you get older to mesh in, or is it get harder? Because people start to understand more. There's more political talk. There's more parental talk. How does that play out? Does that make any sense? Because I've been asked that by people. Because the reason I asked, let me just add this. I see coming out stories all the time. Outsports, Sid Ziegler has them all the time. High school athletes, college athletes coming out all the time. Very, very few at the big leagues and in the NFL, Major League Baseball, and those who do come out when their careers are over. So does it get harder as you get older to come out in sports?
Amy, go ahead. I saw you there.
Oh, good. Okay. Oh, well, I was just going to say something different, which is that I feel like I'm a parent of a kid too. And I think like as soon as you have a kid, there's sort of this realization, or even before that. I mean, I was out before I had my kid, but I had friends who were like, you know, having kids and not out at work or, you know, things like that. And I was kind of like, you know, there's no hiding these things. Like those kids are going to talk about everything. They're going to go to school. They're like be talking. There's like, and so I feel like for me, having a kid and realizing that I don't want to live in a world where there's even any whiff that my kid might get from something I do, or from some like shame that I seem to have about who I am or my relationship, or like who my kid is. And so I think being a parent too has pushed me to be, you know, a better gay person and a better advocate for people.
I have a few more questions from people who are watching us right now, unless somebody else wants to tackle that last question.
I'll just add on to, I think it's, the longer you wait, the harder it is, you know, for a lot of people, you know, and I think it's probably correlated to just the comfort and, you know, kind of what that person's personal experience is, you know, with it as well. So, you know, I think they're probably, you know, it's not necessarily, I think, within a professional setting. I think it's just that person's individual kind of journey along the way that can potentially make it harder if it's later in life.
Two really good questions here. One from Claudia. What steps can fans take to help expedite and accelerate women equality in professional sports? That's a great question. What can fans do?
I would love to answer this one. I think, you know, fans can continue to support the game in a sense of going to the games, right? Getting your butt in a seat, buying season tickets, even to teams that may not be in your local area. Watch the games when they come on television. Even if I'm, you know, have something else to do, I'm always putting on the game on my television to make sure it gets those ratings. And I think follow all your favorite female athletes on social media. Follow all your favorite queer athletes on social media. I think that's where they can start to build their own brands and make money outside of sport, because it may not pay them as much. So I think going to games, watching games on television, and really following all your favorite athletes and supporting them in that way.
Next question from Helen. Also very, very good question. What advice can you offer to a young LGBTQ athlete who has no parental support? Now, that I assume that means not having parents, or it may mean having parents who don't support the cause. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I can jump in here. And I think this is Helen, our former sports coordinator, who founded our sports project. And so she could probably answer this question even better than I can, but I'm going to jump in. I'm monitoring the chat. You know, I think that for a young kid, you know, I think studies have shown that having any supportive adult in their life can make a huge and dramatic difference for them. So I guess I would say, you know, find those adults who are supportive of you and go to them for help. That might be a teacher, that might be a coach, that might be other parents of friends of theirs. And then, you know, studies have also shown that actually when parents understand the harm that it causes children to not be supportive, when they understand that, they often change. And so this is not an easy thing to tell a kid who has a parent right now who's not supportive of them. But it is kind of this, it gets better message, which is that it really does. You know, that when like often there's a great evolution in parents during their time as parents, where they come to regret not accepting their kids in a full-hearted way from the beginning. So that's one thing certainly that's true as well.
Question here from Juliana. Can anybody comment on the homophobic chants by fans of the Mexican men's national soccer team and how tournament organizers have handled it? It seems like a good sign of progress that the team has been threatened with sanctions if they don't shut it down. What do you all think?
Joe, I think you might have a story about this too, that you might want to bring up from your book. But I will start to say that you know, I think people in leadership positions need to be held accountable and create safe spaces. And I think it's a very positive sign to see, you know, when you look at a federation, when you look at holding accountability, you know, and I think we're seeing this in different ways in the US side of things with pay equity as well. But, you talk about how fans can be involved, but ultimately there are people put in certain positions to make sure that safety does happen, especially when we talk about sporting matches. And I think it's really easy for some of those same people to pass responsibility, but ultimately, I think it's kind of like the buck stops here. So for me, that was a very positive sign. And Joe, I think it was Paul who was bringing up Melina de la Cruz.
Yeah. So this is a wonderful story going back to the previous question about having parents who may not be supportive. In the chapter on orientation and raising tomorrow's champions, we speak about a young woman named Melina de la Cruz, and she was not out to her family, and it really affected her life. She was part of a program called Friday Night Lights and just got involved into drugs and alcohol and was skipping school and not doing well in school. And really was just, her life was somewhat falling apart. And that was because she was really withholding this secret from her family. And she didn't think that her parents would be accepting. She didn't think her mother would be accepting. And so she told one of her coaches at Friday Night Lights, and this goes back to what Amy was saying, is just like, trying to find someone that may be supportive of your truth and really trying to share it. And the person that she shared it with encouraged her to really sit down with her mother and to share her story with her mother. And when she did, Melina broke down crying, her mother broke down crying, and her mother was accepting. Her mother was so appreciative of her sharing this with her. And it turned out to be a very loving and accepting conversation. And after that, Melina just really excelled in school. She was part of Saturday Night Lights. I'm correcting myself. And really was thriving as an individual. So I think it goes back to Amy's point and all of our points that holding these secrets can be really hard for children and really hard for our youth, and being able to share them with at least someone, and then eventually being able to share it with your family is just so incredibly important.
If you guys could help me out with my naivete, when I came out 10 years ago, I received a lot of emails from people telling me some harrowing stories about how when they were young, they came out and they were thrown out of the house, and really some sad stories. Does that still happen? Does it happen in sports? I guess I'd be asking you to speak anecdotally, but where are we on that now?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think that definitely does still happen. And sometimes I think especially with trans kids, it's happening more now. And I think that that's why it's so important to have trailblazers and to have people who are visible, and to make sure that the general public understands that trans people exist, that they've always existed, and that there should be progress in terms of even families who initially kick their kids out. Like I said, they can learn, and studies have also shown that it's better for those kids to actually be with their families. I mean, obviously not in some circumstances if the families are abusive or violent, but there actually is a great deal of progress that can be made when parents understand the consequences of throwing their kids out or rejecting them based on their sexual orientation or their gender identity.
Anybody else want to touch on that? Because I just want to throw something into my own in that, and I'm not an athlete. I always feel a need in this company to point that out, but I did do a lot of speaking engagements after I came out. One in particular at a local high school. I'm speaking to 300 or 400 kids. And at the end of my babbling, a bunch of kids came up to the front of the stage just to say hi and whatnot. And one of them was a male student, 16 years old. It was really kind of cute. He was nudged by 2 or 3 of his friends, and they sort of pushed him a few steps up, and he came out to everybody who was standing around him, and he said, "Well, you just got me in the mood." And I have to think that all of you in your own coming out stories, that those things have happened. In many cases, you don't even know it. And I'm guaranteeing you that it has happened in the last couple of days, because there's a real live National Football League player who's come out, and somewhere in this country, there are young male and female athletes who use that as a launching pad to coming out. Do you agree? Amy?
I totally agree. I think that's a great way to put it. And I think that's a great story. You know, we don't even know sometimes the people's lives that we touch. And sometimes we do, you know, we get letters or we get people who come up to us. I'm sure Joanna and Angela have had this experience of many people coming up to them and thanking them for being trailblazers. And so I think that's incredibly important. And when anybody sees themselves represented, it's really powerful and affirming for them.
I would say that was probably one of the best parts of my career, was just being so open and out and getting those responses from fans. And I would walk off the field, probably not scoring any goals or having any assists, but you'd have someone come up to you and just thank you for being who you are. And I had a lot of stories, and I share one great story in Raising Tomorrow's Champions about a friend of mine now. Her name is Emma, and she came up to me after one game and she was visibly shaking. Like meeting me meant that much to her. And I couldn't actually believe that, because to me, I'm nothing special. And I could see her mother next to her, and she came up to me and just thanked me for being so out and so proud, because it helped her to come out to her parents. And, you know, from my own personal experiences and thinking back about parents and acceptance, I think for parents, it can be hard because you have this vision of what your child's life is going to be, right? And I know my mom had a vision that I was engaged to a man, that I was going to get engaged to a man. I would get, the single family home, the white picket fence. And to her, that was the only way to have it. And so when I came out, I completely shattered her vision of who she thought I was going to be. And I think for most parents, they do have that vision. And when your child shares something like that, it can take some time to almost mourn the death of who you thought your child was going to be, and then accept this rebirth of who they are now. And I know that for my mom and dad, it took them some time, but they came around. And I think that's just important to understand from a parenting perspective, that without even knowing it, we may have these visions of our children's lives that when they don't go the way that we want, it can be disappointing in a certain sense.
Angela, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just chime in to what Joe's saying, that, I think from my experience too, I had time, and what you're saying, Joe, you were living, you said you were straight and then you were gay. So, I mean, you had your time to process that, right? We all have our time. We're internally processing,
Yep.
Who we are and understanding that and grasping that. So, I look back and realize that, we need to allow our loved ones, that time as well. And I probably held my parents to maybe higher expectation, or, but everyone needs their process and their time, just like, those of us who are coming out as well. So I think that was something to make a note of. And also, I mean, you said something really powerful. It's people coming up to you to say thank you for being you. Like, what other message should we be sharing with parents and, people who, can really stand in and be caring adults in a young person's life? Like, this is what's being celebrated. Talk about authenticity and being yourself fully, and, loving everyone for that. So, just again, those types of messages are so powerful.
Amy, let me toss this. I think we're going to wrap it up in a few minutes, but Carl Nassib's coming out announcement included a message from him where he said, I hope that these, I'm paraphrasing now, that these kind of messages won't be necessary in the future, and that coming out won't be as big a deal. And when I wrote my column on this for The Athletic, I touched on that point, and how he himself, by saying that and by coming out on the platform that he did, is helping to make that happen. The question is, in closing, when is that going to happen? Just, it's all guesswork, it's all hypotheticals, but when will that happen?
Oh man, this is a hard one. Why do I get the hardest question?
Why you get paid the big bucks, Amy?
Oh, okay. I don't know. This, like I said, I think that the LGBTQ movement has seen incredible progress in like just the last 2 decades. So I'm just gonna say, I don't know. I think maybe 5 years from now. I don't know. But I mean, you know, I remember a conversation I had with an uncle once. I went to visit him, and we were in the car, and he was like, you should be really happy that your parents are so supportive of you. And at the time I was like, oh yeah, I am really appreciative of that. But now I'm kind of like, well, that's kind of a weird thing to say to a kid. Like, you know, like, shouldn't every parent love their kid, like, no matter what is happening? And so I don't know. I think even my own personal growth in that way of thinking and what other people like Joanna and Angela have shared today is just shows a lot of progress already.
Before I bring down the curtains, does anybody want to add to that? That's good.
Said it so well.
That was great. She said it. Yeah.
I do not want the last word. Somebody
Drop the
else.
mic.
5 years. Okay, you heard it here.
Right, that's what I heard.
I would like to thank all of you for not just participating in this, but for inviting me to be a part of it. I got this really cool scarf out of the arrangement. I've got this,
So did I.
and it's awesome. And the book is awesome. You folks are awesome. And I'm very happy to share my office with the people who are participating tonight. And I hope to meet you all in person at some point. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Steve.
Thanks everybody for joining.